everybody. I'm Oliver, and this is Chaotic Bibliophile. Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of Chaotic Bibliophile Podcast Edition, which, if you still haven't checked out my previous video, which is sort of mid-year, not really mid-year check-in with some announcements and what projects I'm working on. One of those projects was doing a podcast because basically I want to talk about books, but I also want to talk about reading, and I want to talk to other people about it rather than just making videos in my room, which I'll still make, especially the big landmark ones like goals videos and yearly wrap-ups videos and stuff like that. So don't fret, those are still coming, but we are doing this as well. And because I know a lot of people like me listen to videos as podcasts, I think this will be completely okay. So, without further ado, we have the first guest in the podcast, which you already knew if you've seen the title of the video and the thumbnail and the background picture. But still, welcome, Ash.
Yay! I'm back.
Yes,
I'm back
after
a
a
long hiatus.
Hiatus, yeah.
When you said I know there's a lot of people like me, I thought you were saying I know a lot of people like me, and I thought that was going to be the end of the sentence. I'm making a podcast because everyone wants to know me.
No, that's not the truth. I don't think anyone has been asking for this.
No.
But,
well, yeah.
We are giving it
not
to the
online,
people.
but in your personal life is all we've been asking for.
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to come and do podcasts with me because it's just fun.
I think it's a
chaotic.
marker of prestige. Like, when we all met you for the first time, you already had 2 podcasts, and then you started working on a podcast at university, and it's like, we just knew you as the podcast guy.
True.
You know? The podcast guy.
Not in the same way that Joe Rogan is.
Yeah,
guy.
exactly. It's not one of those podcasts.
No.
This isn't your alphas podcast.
No.
This is for the omegas only. Yeah.
So
it's not even 5 minutes in, and I bet you're glad you brought me on because I already brought up the Omegaverse. So,
moving on.
Yeah.
So
Let's
this
get down to the real
podcast
issues.
will be about reading, and the more guest recurs, I think, the more we'll make it more about updates, and we might do some fun tags or bring specific topics. But for now, when we introduce new guests, and you are newish, what did we do last time?
What did we do last time,
Yeah.
or when did we do it? It was a year and a half ago, so I answered the wrong question, but we were doing a list of, there was a list of books that were advertised at the end of another book.
Yes.
And we talked about that.
Yeah.
But the reason that we're both smiling is because that other book was A Little Life, and the video was a plug for a podcast we scrapped without ever releasing it.
Yeah.
So hopefully this doesn't go the way of that. But that was a fun video. That was good.
It was a very good video.
Yeah.
It was really fun. So
And somehow I got invited back in spite of my... I think I literally knocked over your...
camera, yeah.
Yeah.
That's in the bloopers of that video. So you will find it in the description down below and in the eye as always. So go check it out because it's a really good time. I have prepared...
For us, at least.
Yeah.
Don't know about anyone else.
That's a popular video. I think it's fine.
I hope so.
Yeah, so what we'll do today is I have actually prepared questions. And it will be more centered around you. Well, I might chime in as well, obviously.
I hope so.
But it's all about your identity as a reader, because I've been thinking a lot recently about, reading through time and how that changes and what role sort of both literature in the most general sense or just books, play on people's lives. And so, I'm going to have different guests every month. And again, guests will definitely recur. And when that happens, we'll obviously change the questions or give the podcast another focus. So this is just conversation for you to have in the background while you clean your house or go on a long run or, I don't know, are working. So,
driving to the State of the Union address, whatever you're doing, presenting your research.
Yes. What?
I think I think we should start. I think that being interviewed is going to is going to feed my ego so much. It's going to be like Euphoria.
Yeah.
My narcissist ass is going to really enjoy this.
True.
But we'll see how we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, also reply to the questions myself.
One hopes,
so,
yeah, I hope so.
Anyway, the first one is, have you always been a reader? And
Yeah.
tell me about a sort of turning point to you as a reader, especially if you haven't been before.
That's a good
What's
question.
that journey for you?
So, was I always a reader? Yes. Yeah. So, next question. What was the turning point for me? That's a great... This is fun. I think...
Good. Can you imagine those are terrible questions? I don't want to be here anymore.
Well, no, that's so invasive of you. How dare you? I can't believe you're asking me about reading. So yeah, I was always a reader. I mean, I have memories, like some of my earliest memories of being in the car and reading, being at home while the TV is on, or being at my grandmother's house while the TV is on and reading. It was just like, I had a very insatiable kind of appetite for it. So yeah, I definitely always was one. And you know how like your family will tell you stories of when you're a kid and you're like, I don't even remember that was a thing. Like my family always like, oh, you used to, walk around, holding a book and you'd like nearly bump into lampposts and stuff like that. I literally remember that anyway. Like these are all of my earliest memories. So like a huge reader, but I think in a slightly unusual way, because I don't know if this is unusual. I guess we'll find out from other people in the podcast. But like, even though I loved reading, I don't think I really... Weirdly, I don't think I saw myself as that big of a reader specifically. Like, I loved watching films. I loved listening to music. I loved all of that stuff as well. So it was a bit of a toss-up which one was going to take precedence for me. I can't think of a specific time, but there were definitely times where reading was like something I just didn't want to do. I would go in and out of it. That I was a lapsed reader so many times in my life, right? And there were lots of times where I'd mean to read a book in a day, but then a bit of a book, but then I wouldn't. Or, whenever we go on holiday as family, I would do lots of reading then, but then not when I come back. So it was sporadic. I'm going to finally get to the other question you asked. The turning point was The Catcher in the Rye, for sure, 100%. Mm-hmm. So when I was about 13... Actually, this story has quite deep roots. When I was 11...
God.
When I was 11, I was...
I feel like there should be that graph, and I'm going to see if I find it to put it here, but that graph where it's like anatomy of an anecdote, normal, point A, point B, me telling a story, just like literal fork in the road.
Yeah. This is like a quantum lasagna. Like, there's so many layers to it, and we're not sure if they exist or not. I think... Like, when I was 11... So, I was at Catholic school, which is the start of all good stories. Well, maybe not, actually. I think it really depends on the person. But I had an alright time in Catholic school, relatively speaking. Just the normal level of homophobia. Right? And I think that and I was getting my communion, actually. I was receiving my first communion. I was in year 7, so I was about 11 years old. And as a communion present, my parents had said that they would get me a book, and I got to go and choose one, and I chose I chose a couple of books actually, but they were all Stephen King books. After just entering into the fold, after entering into God, I choose one of the most anti-religious horror writers. I've been meaning to read him for a while because I always grew up liking horror and stuff like that. Stephen King mentions certain books a lot, and one of the ones he mentioned a lot was Catcher in the Rye. Yeah, I asked my English teacher why The Catcher in the Rye was so important, or like what it was about, and he said it's just kind of about a 15-year-old, and I was like, he said it was really good. I asked my parents to get a copy, I got a copy, and I was just so amazed. I was really amazed by the narrative voice, which I think is the most striking thing in the book, but also just... I obviously wasn't out as gay or non-binary, and being a male at birth, I think I've gravitated for a long time towards art that's about vulnerability in men. And one of the things I really enjoyed about Catcher in the Rye that I think gets overlooked because, like, it gets, people like to focus on the whole whiny teenager aspect of it, which is definitely there. But the reason the book it transcends that for me is because as whiny as Holden is, there's always space made for uncertainty and vulnerability, and there's so much fear in that book. Yeah. And I think because of that, I connected to it a lot. Yeah.
And so much care as well with the whole image with the Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
If you haven't read it, read it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to... Yeah, I'll try not to give any spoilers, but there is one scene, which I'm going to spoil. There's one thing that, like... There's one thing... this is the really specific turning point for me, I think. Yeah. There's one part where he about 2/3 of the way into the book... Because the book is basically about him... It starts with him skipping school, and then he sort of becomes a nomad.
Yeah.
It's quite eccentric in that respect. And he ends up staying at the house of one of his ex-teachers. And then he goes to sleep... And then there's just this line that says, I don't want to talk about what happened next. And it's just one paragraph on its own. And then the story moves on. And that really stuck with me. You know, the fact that, like, a narrative doesn't have to reveal everything.
Yeah.
And what it does. Not just the unreliability of it, but just, like, the fact of what... The idea that what someone does or doesn't reveal... is such a human choice.
Yeah.
Because when you first start reading literature, I think you're immersed in this culture here where it's like, you know, you read a book, the book is genius, and the book takes on a life of its own. Yeah. That was the first time I was like, this book was written by a person, about a person, from a person's perspective. And that humanity is what I fell in love with.
That's lovely. Unsurprisingly, I have also been a reader since I was really young.
Oh, wow.
My sort of youthful anecdote is I used to play at reading before I could read.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so cute.
I had obviously lots of storybooks, but my dad also had, I still remember, he had a lot of chess books. And so those have sort of pictures, right, which are diagrams, but I would invent stories.
Wait, for reference, how old were you when you learned to read, roughly?
3.
Okay. So even before age 3, you were like, these are things I like.
Yeah.
That's cute. That's really cute.
Oh, yeah, for sure. My dad had a lot of books, still does. And also, well, he could have become...
You could have stolen them.
And that too. And he also had he was doing this course, speed reading course, which obviously we can talk about how, you know, BS they are, whatever. Some of the techniques are good for studying, though. And anyways, it also had these sort of short tales that they used as... sort of examples, or like exercises, and I had pictures that I would create or pretend that I was reading, because obviously I was inventing the story, but I pretended
so
that I wasn't,
cute.
that I was reading the story, even though it wasn't.
Did you ever read the book and then it turned out to be less interesting than the thing that you had in your head?
Yeah.
Probably all the time.
All the time, yeah.
So you already set a really high standard.
Exactly. And then a turning point, it maintained that for years. There were years where I was like more lapsed, but I had this reputation in school about being the person with the book under his desk. So many times teachers... It was funny because obviously teachers needed to scold me because I wasn't paying that much attention, but also they didn't want to discourage the reading aspect of it. So they would like be funny about it. And a lot of the times they would just bang on my desk and I would be like... startled.
Oh my god.
And you know, it was funny and we all laughed and that sort of vibe. But no one ever tried to stop me too much because
okay, that's good.
they want kids to read.
Yeah.
But I would still say that a turning point to me identifying as a reader was when I was around 16, I started reading more nonfiction and more sort of experimental fiction.
Yeah.
With nonfiction specifically, there was this one book of essays by a very famous sort of critic and like academic in Chile, and those were sort of, it's the first time I encountered what we consider now creative nonfiction,
right
and I was blown away, and also that sort of putting into words that identification as a reader, and you know, having a taste and also the idea of like lineage, because obviously they talk a lot about the classics, like Madame Bovary or Ulysses, the Quixote, which is very weird for me to say it like that, Quixote. So yeah, it was this whole thing where, this is a universe of people like me.
Like, you get to do more than just read privately.
Exactly.
Because I think that's one of the big differences between you and me, and also one of the reasons that I was such a lapsed reader is that, like, my temperament as a child was very, like, I was always very outgoing.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that, I talked about not necessarily identifying as a reader. One of the things that honestly kept me from that is that there was this idea that the kid who reads is the kid who sits alone at lunch and reads for 4 hours.
Which is what I did sometimes.
Even though I did read a lot, it was very, very rare that I was alone at lunch. And if I was begging people to come and spend time with me, sort of thing. Whereas for you, I feel like it's maybe something that you glommed onto. That sounds so dismissive. It's something that you got attached to a lot quicker because of that. Yeah.
Well, it was also easier it's an easy justification to spend time on, because obviously I'm the opposite. I was very sociable, and I still am in school.
Yeah.
But there were points where interactions felt really tiresome, and I just wanted time by myself. And I think a good way of justifying that time was through reading.
Well, I mean, the best thing about reading, whether you're an introvert, extrovert, I think that reading helps you know people in the world really well. And it's really nice. Like, I can't ever think of a time that reading was... I can't ever think of a time that reading made me feel like I wasn't connected to people. Right? Like, even when I've read bad books out of curiosity, or read books I didn't enjoy for uni or a class or something else, or even just hearing about books that I think are probably harmful, right? Like, not in an explicit Mein Kampf way only, but like also, certain forms of self-help, or like, ideologically troubling books. The If Books Could Kill crowd, right? Like, even that stuff makes a case for our place in, like, the world and our place in it and our responsibilities to each other. Like, I don't think you can ever write anything that doesn't, that doesn't involve that in some way.
Yeah. So how would you define your life as a reader now?
That's a really interesting... I don't really know even how to answer that. I mean, I can say what I'm reading at the moment is a bit more varied than before. Like, I've been reading a bit more non-fiction recently. I mean, one of the things that Oliver and most people rightfully take umbrage with about me is that I have a list of books.
Oh yeah.
That I like to read in a specific order.
Well,
and I don't just mean
if you explain it just like that, it makes no sense, because obviously, as people who watch this channel know, I always make lists about books to read. So it's not just about the list.
But I would read... Okay,
how the list came about, I would read and what the list is.
I read books in the order I buy them. So if I buy 50 books in one day, which is not as much of an exaggeration as I'd like. Or in an ideal world, that wouldn't be an exaggeration. That would be an underestimate. But yeah, like, if I buy like 3 or 4 books in a day, but I'm still trying to read ones that I bought 6 weeks ago, I'm gonna carry on reading the 6 weeks ago ones and just leave it.
Yeah.
And then if I maybe like a couple of weeks later, I buy one that I see on sale, I'm not gonna get to that until I finish the 6 weeks ones if I'm still through them.
I think there is the list that most people take umbrage with was the one, not the books that you bought, because I feel like, again, that sounds so much more reasonable. I think it was the Amazon list.
Oh, the Amazon list, but the Amazon list I still use, though. I mean, I still...
Which we don't support Amazon here.
The wish list is really terrible, because... If it wasn't on Amazon, it would be fine. Yeah. Is what you're saying. No, I have a list of books that I want, and I also buy those in the order that I put them on the list, which means that right now there are books that I put on the list in 2022. But actually, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. When I met you, they were earlier.
Yeah, when you met me, there were ones from like 2020.
Yeah.
2020.
And I guess it's hard to...
Yeah, sorry.
Though, it's just, I guess... The thing is, it's because a lot of them were books that it seems that you put in there quite without much consideration.
Yeah.
So I guess for all of us fickle readers, undisciplined readers, unlike you, it just feels like a lot of commitment for books that you didn't put that much thought.
I think that even the most...
Because some of them were... I remember when we just met, I recommended you amazing books, but you were like, okay, and put them on the list. And so the idea of doing that for years and then sticking to that, I can't even stick to my own TBRs.
Yeah.
It's terrible for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have two answers to that. First of all, I think even the most robust person among us emotionally, like, needs to feel somehow that they're not going to die, right?
Yeah.
And needs to feel like they'll somehow transcend death. And for me, that's transcending death. Like having having the wish list is a way for me to pretend. Like, if the books are on the list, I can always pretend I will get to them. Even if I know, I will be like 97.
Yeah.
And probably not even know my password. And I'll still be like writing down lists of books if paper and pen still exist. But so that's one thing. But then also I think the other thing is I actually think I advocate for taking recommendations as expansively as you possibly can from your immediate circles. I think if you listen to a true crime podcast but you don't like crime fiction and they recommend a bunch of crime fiction and you read it, you're not going to like it, so that's stupid.
Yeah.
But if you meet people and you have a good conversation and they recommend you a book, put it on the list. Even if like you don't know them that well and they recommend you a book, put it on the list, because I have had situations where, so when I was 17, the person I sat next to in English class recommended me a book. It was The Book Thief. And I was like, yeah, I'll read that sometime. Didn't get around to it until I was like 22, 23. And it was bad, so I never talked to her again. Yeah. But if someone recommends me a book and it's good and I read it 4 years later, I get to message them and say, hey, remember 4 years ago you recommended that book? It's really good. So I think that's kind of why I do it. I think it's because, and I do this, like this is getting to the point of obsession, but I write down the names of the people who do the books, and like if I have their contact details in case the book is good, right?
Have you ever gone back to someone to tell them the book was shit?
I wish I had done that. I'm unfortunately I'm not that far into my recommendations to be able to do that. I don't think I'd ever have the guts. I really don't. No. But one day maybe.
I have to admit that I'm very conciliatory. When it comes to people that I like, and if they talk about a book and they like it, even though I might think it's bad, I have used the word interesting to sort of cover that up. I say like, it can be interesting from this perspective. And I won't lie and say I liked it, but I won't be harsh. Which is untrue. The way that you could know I can be.
Yeah. Which is quite different for me. Like, I don't start a book conversation with everything nice to say, but if someone asks me, I find it really hard not to. Yeah. I find it hard to disguise my opinions. I think I'm generally, like, I've been working on it, but I think I'm quite a people pleasery person by nature. And I think everyone has to have something they care about too much for polite society. And true. Books are mine, which is what qualifies me to be here. Yeah. To get back to the original question. Yes. My identity as a reader, I would say, is ranging more than it used to be. Nice. Because the big downside to this whole list thing is that maybe 2 years ago I had a phase where I was like, oh, I'm really into Marxist literature right now and I know I'm going to want to read loads, so I just add them all to the list. But then don't read them. And then 2 or 3 years later, I'm like, I finally got to these and I don't care about this issue anymore, right? Yeah. I don't think there's anything that I have on my shelf that's as drastic as that. But you do end up in this situation where you're suddenly reading a bunch of nonfiction and a bunch of fiction rather than just... So I've been trying to vary up on that front. My identity as a reader right now, I can boil down to... I can boil down to sort of queer, cheesy genre critique. Those are the three... those are the 4 terms. Not that specific form, but those are the 4 areas that my reading has to lapse around. I've mostly been reading a lot more genre fiction than I normally do. That's true. I've been reading a lot more criticism than I was before. And, like, queer, not just in terms of queer literature, but, like, I'm actively trying to read as many interesting things as possible right now.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Would you want that to change in the future? Like, do you have sort of utopian vision of what your life as a reader would be?
I think, well, I feel like if you ask this question to everyone, we're all going to say, having more time to read, right?
Yeah.
Wall to ceiling.
I
picture.
actually have a different question.
The Beauty and the Beast library, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of like ideal, as in, do I have like ideal genres or
like for example, I feel that some people are like, oh, I would love to read more classics or to become a more non-fiction reader, whatever. Or I guess in your case it's not that, but I know a lot of people who are sort of casual readers that are, oh, I would like to become more of a reader.
Well, I suppose mine.
I don't know, anything you can think
I suppose
of.
mine isn't really like. I suppose mine isn't really like doing anything different from what I'm doing now. It's not really the opposite. It's more just I would like to find that, like, I like experimental fiction a lot, as you know, and I think I would just try and find the most obscure, experimental, terrifying work. I want to go sail off the edge of the universe and scoot past it, right? Like I'm so interested in doing. I think I get restless a lot as a person, and a lot of the restlessness I feel is that that everyone gets, right?
Yeah.
This kind of like life could be so much more, but for me, it's not this like, oh, I wish I lived in Sicily. Life could be so much more. Yeah. It's more like I wish I could disintegrate and sprinkle myself among the bricks. Like, it's more that kind of thing.
I have a book that might satisfy that for you, and it's queer. And also, I have a booktuber recommendation.
You know I'm going to take it after what I've said.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very interesting. For me, my life as a reader is very varied. I think that is the main word for it. When I used to organize my books per sort of topic, people used to joke that it sounded like the entire section, the entire bookshop, because I had philosophy, music writing, science writing, nature writing,
yeah, I sort of have that.
Novels, and I do like that. This is not a real dream of mine, but I think part of me wishes that I could pick one thing and that be more of my thing. Because I don't know, sometimes I see people whose taste is just so well defined, whereas with me, I do think I have a specific taste. It's just I think I have specific tastes in lots of genre, and I don't like. I would love to read so much more music writing, so much more modern classics, so much more contemporary arts and literature, so much more short stories, and so it's just. Yeah, it's sort of, I want to read more of everything in this way that, you know, some people I think have more their things. I think my real desire as a reader would be to make TBRs that I can actually stick to and then like actually follow through completely.
Yeah, 95% of being a good reader or becoming a better reader is just reading more. And not just the quantity of things, but the quality. Not in the sense of them being good, but in the sense of what kind of thing they are, right?
Yeah.
Like, you just got to read really widely. I know you want to move on to the next question. I want to tell a story real quick that I think speaks to this question about what kind of reader I'd want to be. In 2006, 2007, I don't know the author's name, but this guy wrote a book called The Rorschach Texts. Have you heard about this? I think you
No, I have not.
Okay, so the guy, the Rorschach Text is basically, the plot itself is actually kind of derivative, I found from the description. I haven't actually read it, but basically it's about this guy who, I think he's a writer, he loses his memory and he has to try and gain it back through a series of like psych evaluations and similar things, and memory is a theme and all that kind of thing. So not like the most novel idea necessarily for a story, but the book has 32 or 33, something like that, pages that aren't in any of the copies. Like, they're not ripped out, you can physically not see them, but like there are extra bits of the book hidden around the world.
Okay.
And the whole book is...
I feel like I've heard about this, or maybe you told
me. I might have told you about this, but the whole book features a set of codes, alongside the narrative, a set of codes to find this. So there's this sort of ARG, alternate reality game vibe to it, which I really enjoy. The thing I find interesting about this story is that Rorschach Text is now out of print, to the point where acquiring it, like, it's fairly cheap on Amazon, but like acquiring it is still like a significant task.
Yeah.
And it won't continue to be printed, probably. And so if the book goes, there will be, I think 10 pieces have been found, so like 23 pieces of paper that we might never find that are just somewhere if the author's not lying. So
but then
things
the
like
other
that
things have been found then.
Yeah. So 10 pages have been found, I think,
Whoa.
which suggests that they're all real, or at least more of them than just 10.
Yeah.
So that's my utopian idea of reading, is reaching a point where everything I read gives me some equivalent of that experience, where the book kind of reaches into, it doesn't even have to be a good book, but it reaches into the real world in a way that makes me think.
Yeah.
Kind of quietly and slightly frightened thoughts.
That's really interesting. So I think that we're actually making really good time.
Oh, fuck, I really didn't expect that.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
So I have some questions that seem to be more rapid fire, but I think in practice might not be. 3 books that
We should never say what made
you or define you. So I have another one that are 3 recent favorites. So keep that in mind.
Okay.
I just want to know, because this is the impetus behind having these 2 different questions, is that I think a lot of our favorite books, especially if we've been readers since youth, are very, like, get fossilized. And then we are like, oh, that is my favorite book, but then we actually haven't read it in 5 years, which is fine. I don't think you necessarily need to reread your favorite book over and over, although that might be the case. But yeah, I sort of wanted to allow some room for that distinction.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can answer both questions at the same time, however you prefer.
I get you. So first of all, ones that define me as a person, definitely Never Let Me Go, obviously. I mean, that is my favourite book.
Yeah.
But I can say that because I reread it like 7 or 8 months ago. And it never stops being almost as good, if not better. Like, it never stops being as good, maybe even better when I reread it. I think that my relationship to that book is... I think reading that book is meaningful to me because it is about everything I think about in the world and I think is important in the world. And I think one of the most important criteria for your favourite book is that you find it good. You know, I imagine that's even the most sort of like contrarian among us, like i.e. me, needs to enjoy something.
Yeah.
Uncomplicatedly. But I also think that one of the things that makes a book that has to be part of someone, like that one of the criteria for something to be a favourite of yours, or of a person's, is it has to like be about or concerning or to touch upon things which don't just feel like they interest you or are important to you, but things which feel like the most fundamental questions ever. And Never Let Me Go being about, like, it being sort of sci-fi, sci-fi light is fun for me because I like sci-fi, but also it's about art, it's about people, it's about like, it's about feeling insignificant or lesser than in a way that is obviously fictional to the book, but is so literalized and is so systemic. And without giving anything away, because I really think everyone should read it, the thing that the whole conversation about disposability and feeling lesser than is grounded in the actual events of the plot in this way that's so one-to-one, right?
Yeah.
Like, even more so than something concrete, like, you know, race or sexuality or class might make you feel disposable. This one encompasses all of that and then hits straight to the core of identity, and I think that's incredible. So yeah, love that book. Another one, Snowflake by Paul Gallico. It's not necessarily one of my favourite books, I just think it's wonderful. I mean, I'm scared that I'll read it again one day and it will turn out to be, like, racist or something, because it is from the 1970s or 60s. Snowflake is a children's book. I got it at a car boot sale. It's super obscure, like, so obscure.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, and it literally just... It's illustrated, and it tells the story of the life cycle of a snowflake from the perspective of a snowflake. And I remember, even though I stick by my Catcher in the Rye answer, I'd say that was another moment where... I remember reading that book, and even as a 6 or 7 or... Like, I think maybe I was, like, 7 or 8. I think as a 7 or 8-year-old, I remember thinking, like, like having some sense that this was just a really beautiful thing, and delicacy. Not delicacy so much as sort of fragility and the beauty of fragility. And the way that fragility to me is like this essential component of beauty, right? Like, we're all fragile and things are fragile, and that kind of makes it beautiful. And without that book, without Snowflake, I would never have learned that lesson. And on a similar note, actually, you're going to like this one. Actually, really, really, it was sort of a difficult thing to think about because, you know, part of me does want to choose a play. I think something like Angels in America or Streetcar is something I really connect to. But again, when I think of things that really define me, it's Oscar Wilde's short fiction.
Interesting. I do appreciate that. Yes.
And particularly his children's fiction, because there is so much kindness in there and so much empathy.
Oh my god, yeah.
I love De Profundis for similar reasons, but, you know, it's obviously it's a personal letter, so that doesn't disqualify it, but it doesn't aim at transcendence in that same kind of way, or aim at sort of a wider meaning necessarily. Whereas Oscar Wilde's children's stories, I think I love not just for the stories themselves, but because they exist in the context of a person who is understood as the opposite, like simplistically understood as the opposite of what those stories are. You know, he's taken to be someone who's incredibly ironic and all about appearances and masks and codes and playful, and there's no real meaning, so let's not worry about it, and this kind of thing. Like, I think there's a degree of, or so much of, everything is persona with Oscar Wilde in the way he's presented, and I think he wants it to be that way. His short fiction in general, but especially his children's fiction, is a way for him to speak to the things that he cares about, in a way that goes beyond just his queerness and goes into fundamental values that, like, honestly, I think under Victorian society you can't express. You know, you're allowed to talk about kindness being important because all societies want to think kindness is important. But in the Victorian world, kindness couldn't mean the things that Oscar Wilde used fiction to let it mean and allowed it to mean and explored with the short fiction. So yeah, I feel like it's very obvious what the connecting themes between those two things are. But that's what I would say for my definitions. Yeah.
Nice. For me, well, I think Emma.
Are you going to have to answer this question every single week?
No, I might vary them. I might.
Okay, I'm not going to say otherwise.
I'm not going to say the same things over and over.
And I've answered this last week, so I'll just push play on the record.
I'll switch it up.
Yeah.
And I'm leaving this inside, so people are reassured that.
Yeah. I was wondering.
Yeah. I might bring, I don't know, things that past guests have said. I might change the questions. I don't know. It's all free play.
It's all free play.
So, yeah, books that made me define me. I think the first one has to be Emma. It's the first book that I read as a kid that was like a real, not for children's book. It's a novel. I read it in a day during a car trip, and it felt, substantial.
Yeah.
And I still think it's the best Jane Austen.
Absolutely. The graphic sex scenes are not child appropriate.
The most modern as well. I love it. I haven't read it for the past 3 years maybe, but I think I reread it during the pandemic, and I still, it holds up. Then it was hard because this one I do reread almost every year. I haven't read it this year yet, but I think the time might be coming. Less by Andrew Sean Greer. I just love this book. I think it's brilliant in a very unassuming way. I think, to be completely honest, just based on some other things I read by the author, I think it might be sort of
one trick pony.
Not one trick pony, more like, I don't want to say a fluke because I don't want to be that dismissive, but it seems like the editing and the impetus behind it, sort of everything aligned to create this one perfect book. And I think it's really, really good in ways that it has so many layers, but it also seems like it's just light and fluffy, and, it's a rom-com in a way. And so I think that hides a lot of profundity. Yeah. And I think that I actually really admire. I think it's really difficult to do.
I think if you're paying attention, Less is such a consistently surprising novel.
Exactly.
I remember when I was reading it, I was telling you about it.
Yes.
Because obviously you were the person who recommended it to me. when I was reading it and I was talking to you about it, every single time I finished a chapter or even a section, I was like, that was not what I expected.
Exactly.
You know?
So there was that. And then the other one, it was hard to choose, but I definitely think Fun Home / Are You My Mother. I remember Are You My Mother by Alison Bechdel was at the time what I said was my favorite, even though I thought Fun Home is the objectively better book, because I think it hangs together better and it's very constructed. Whereas Are You My Mother is a little bit tortured. But I haven't read it as much because for many reasons I've had to read Fun Home a number of times. And I've always loved it. So at this point, I don't know. But both of those, just, you know, the idea that graphic novels could be literature, that graphic memoir was a thing. Graphic nonfiction now is one of my favorite genres. And so it just opened the possibilities. Also one of the first lesbian texts that I read. The queerness in it. Everything. It's just...
What I've taken from this is that you've cheated and put 4 novels on, so that's really, really when it's supposed to be 3. So actually, I think you're gonna have to choose whether you like
They're
it.
a bundle. They're okay. For now, maybe Fun Home.
No, but they're really great. But the thing is, I think I struggle to appreciate Fun Home anywhere near as much as I really like Are You My Mother. I wonder how much of that has to do with, because they're both very gendered books, and that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Like, not gendered in this, like, well, the point is that they're exploring gender rather than just embracing it uncomplicatedly. But you know, as I think I've said to you before, Are You My Mother? I think I prefer because of the unevenness that seems to be. It feels to me more honest, which I don't think it necessarily is. I think it's just that that's something I respond to more.
Yeah.
Whereas Fun Home is very, like, it feels so well made that I'm a little bit like, can you really have feelings if you're this put together?
Yeah, I understand. So 3 recent favorites.
Recent favorites. Well, one of them is going to be no surprise to you, and it, you know, I did actually think about putting this on my Define one, but
I thought about that. That's why actually that book is the reason I said, hey, but we have a recent favorite one.
Yeah. There we go.
Literally.
Not only has it not quite been long enough. Have I not technically finished the book?
Yeah.
But I also think it's like not quite been long enough that I can, you know, I have much to say about the ways it's defined me.
Yeah.
But the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante have been a source of unbelievable comfort through one of the most difficult years of my life. I started reading them I read My Brilliant Friend in January as a buddy read with one of my work friends. Shout out to Elizabeth if she won't be listening, but it's like, you know, one can dream.
You might send it to her. She might get into it.
She's not going to get this far in. But anyway, so I read My Brilliant Friend, honestly expecting to think that it was good and then not read the rest of them.
Yeah.
And I was so intrigued, I bought the second one, and then I've just fallen so in love with them. Because Ferrante has this way of writing that is so generous to the terrible, terrible, terrible qualities that most people have inside of them. Obviously, I don't think that every single person who reads this book is going to have the exact same flaws as either Eleanor or Lila, the 2 principal characters. But, nor has everyone been in that kind of relationship, right? It's a very particular dynamic they have. But the reason it's so good is because it points to this kind of honesty that sort of seems to... It's funny because I wouldn't say there's no conflict in the novel, but like the way the matter-of-fact way Eleanor seems to talk about everything, her frankness just is so open to the humanity of everyone. Yeah. You know? Yeah,
and I have to say also that the translation, because I've read it and loved it, well, the first one, because of you, it'll definitely show up in my, spoiler alert, in my top books of the year.
Good.
But... I think also the translation is just extraordinary. It feels at times, as we've discussed, a little bit awkward in English, but in a way where, like, I can imagine the Italian way. That's brilliant.
Can you get me my phone?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm blanking on some of my recent reads, so I do just want to check if I'm missing anything.
I've thought about some, so I can...
No, it's okay. Because I have more to say about the Neapolitan novels.
Okay.
I would say, one of the other things I would like to say is that Neapolitan novels... I read them the way I read them was I read the first one in January. The second one I was like, I'll wait till April. And I've essentially spread this, because there's 4 of them, I've spread them out quarterly through the year. I would recommend this as one of the many methods, the good methods to read this book. Not necessarily that long a time period, but like give yourself time between books. Because reading them all at once, you'll still love them, I'm sure. I mean, you know, I haven't finished the series, but the feeling of going back to Naples after a little break and going back to this really horrible, like, tense, fraught world that they all live in, but that's also so kind of tender, in the same way that a wound is, really. Like, it's a real reward. Like, take your time with those novels in whatever way you can, I would say. In terms of other things, I also I'm currently reading Orientalism, and I'm only about halfway through, but that's brilliant. I think Saeed's writing is excellent. It's very clear. He's very
he's surprisingly approachable compared to other scholars of his same time.
Exactly. He's accessible, and he's very good at making he's really good at without going into cold, boring argumentation. He's good at making the main themes of his chapters really clear.
Yeah.
He's good at making you see how all the theories relate to each other that he's proposing,
agreed.
And it all feels really cohesive, which you rarely get from monographs, honestly. A lot of the time they're just shorter essays that have been made into a book.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of sprawling in there, but Orientalism is so tight, yet so ranging, and it's a really impressive. So recommend that. The last thing, as Oliver will be very pleased to hear, that I really loved is Get the Picture.
Yes.
By Bianca Bosca.
So good. The same author as Cork Dork, which I have spoken before in this channel.
She wants to not become an artist, but she wants to understand art by sewing herself into the fabric of the art world, like as closely as she can. And I wouldn't say that I learn new things in the sense of, like, you do learn a lot about how the art world works and how it feels to be in there.
But also we both know a lot about it, so I think...
Yeah, exactly. It just kind of accords with broader things I felt like I already knew.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think it has a lot of value even to, like, the seasoned, like, art enthusiast, because, like, reading about Bianca learning how to see and developing the eye reminds you of all the reasons that you like art in the first place. Or if you're at the point where you're not really sure about it, or you're struggling to get into it, she has some great advice. Yeah. And it's advice that is why art is so good in the first place, because it's transferable, to use the capitalist term, or holistic, to use my favorite term. Like, her telling you to be patient and to look at things and to notice things as carefully as you can means that you travel through the world in a more engaged, wonderful way. You know, there's more pleasure in that.
I agree. I think also, obviously there's a lot of privilege there, but there is a degree to which it's so compelling, the idea of her sort of throwing herself out there into this world, and so completely and just game for anything that comes along. And I think that's just admirable, and the way she writes about it is beautiful.
And she does so much, she covers so much happens in the book, and it's a relatively short book. Like, it's about 350, 400 pages, maybe.
Of a hardcover.
Yeah. So it's not huge.
For everything that she does.
For everything that happens in it. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll race through mine, just because some of them I've talked about before.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say Vladimir by Julia May Jonas, which has stayed with me so much, and I re-listened to it. So I first read it, now re-listened to it. Funnily enough, I still don't own a copy because I first read it digitally, and now it's kind of like, I shouldn't buy a book. If I find a secondhand copy, I'll get it, I think is how I feel about it. But it's brilliant, best campus novel, so interesting, and also so fun. I feel like I rarely read books that I think are brilliant but also so plotty. and the fact that I was also intrigued about what would actually happen more than just the insights.
Some absolutely delicious pulp.
Exactly. That Ace by Angela Chen, read on the same way. Life-changing. I still think and cite that book all the time, and I need to reread it. But then a new one, which I have you to thank, which also is a book that has accompanied me in one of the hardest years of my life, is The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri.
Yes!
I'm gonna get a tattoo of one of the phrases there from one of the short stories. Best short story collection ever. There are some short story collections that I read that come close or might be even equally good, but I can say unquestionably that is one of the best short story collections ever written, period.
There's that stock phrase that you get on a lot of books in publishing, the pull quote that just says a rare find or a rare treat.
Yeah.
And Interpreter of Maladies really does feel like a rare treat. Not because it's not the most obscure book ever written, but Lahiri is a somewhat she's fairly unsung, I would say, in the grand scheme of literature. I mean, not so much in the academy,
she feels
but
very she feels very sort of MFA. Like if you are an MFA reader or writer, you would know her.
Yeah, like she might be in a specialist canon, but she's not like gonna survive through the 21st century kind of thing. Is how, you know, I think I and other people have thought of her if they'd heard of her at all. But then you first read her and it's amazing how many layers she crams into the most spare, subtle prose. It's breathtaking what she's doing.
I agree.
It really is.
I agree. Okay, so speeding it up because we have 2 more questions and we need to start wrapping it up.
Fair enough.
But 3 books you dislike.
Just like as a whole.
Yes, or didn't finish. Like just 3 books that
recent or overall,
wherever you want.
A Little Life, obviously. Enough has been said about that. I just think it's terrible, and I think that it represents bad things for a marginalised community.
Yeah, and I also didn't finish it.
Bad book. What are you gonna do? Other books I don't like recently.
Let me think. I feel like I also need to.
I've been blocking the...
I'll talk about one book that was a disappointment this year was Winter by Alice Smith. Because, you know, I love Alice Smith. The Seasonal Quartet, I think, is definitely not her best work. But out of all of them, I think Winter is the worst one. And it's the one that I didn't finish. And it's interesting because it's usually the one that's celebrated as the best. If not Autumn, and I think Autumn is definitely the best. I haven't read Companion Piece yet, but that is a big disappointment. I would say Persuasion is another book that...
Jane Austen.
Yeah, Jane Austen, which I know you don't like Jane Austen mostly, generally, but I was surprised.
It's supposed to be different, isn't it?
Yeah, because usually people who are sort of a true Austenite will say, Persuasion is one of the solid ones. I disagree. I did not like it. Whereas I think Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility are really good. And Emma is a masterpiece. So, yeah. How about you? What you got?
So I... I already said A Little Life, obviously. That's like my stock answer. I'm looking back here, I can believe I forgot about this. This will be controversial. This Is How You Lose the Time War was one of the biggest, like... I think it might be one of the worst books I've read ever. Not because it's like a supremely bad book, but just because I try to read things that are, if not good, then interesting. The problem with it, This Is How You Lose the Time War, is that it's not, to me, not very interesting, and the ways in which it's boring, I didn't think it was very good, and the ways in which it's bad, I found boring. It's, a lot of people love it, and I
think the concept is interesting.
Yeah, the concept is interesting. I can see why a lot of people love it. The problem I have with it is that, it is only 180, 190 pages, and it still feels overlong. It is just set piece after set piece. The ideas are so thin, the relationship is so thin, the relationship that is central to the novel, is so thin. But more than anything, the two... I can see what it's going for the whole time with the thinness, by the way, because it's supposed to be this disconnected across time thing. But the chemistry isn't there. And the chemistry isn't there because most of all, the prose is terrible. The prose is smug, it's pretentious, it's very purple, and it it dresses to impress without doing anything else, and it doesn't even impress. I might have some choice quotations on my phone. I'm not going to get into it now, but yeah.
The quotations were bad.
If anyone does like that book, fight me. I don't think it's good.
There you go. Comments are open. Be somewhat respectful, please.
The other book that I was disappointed by, I'll say, and this might have been because I should have read it over the course of like a year and been really patient. Like I don't know if I read it in the best way, but Goethe's Faust was a bit of a disappointment to me.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so...
You only read part 1, or you read
No, I read the whole thing.
Okay.
Part 1 I liked, but as set up for part 2. Yeah. Like, I was thinking to myself, this is really good, and when it gets into part 2, I've heard it gets really crazy, so it's going to be brilliant. Part 2 has what I like to call Paradise Lost syndrome, which is that, which is where a text, like a book or a play or a poem, like, is so referential that all of the dense references and allusions and suggestions that it has in there obscure any of the emotional or narrative or like meaningful content. Paradise Lost doesn't have this all the way through, to be fair. I've heard it has good bits, but the first 3 or 4 books of Paradise Lost are just a bunch of Bible references, and I was like, I don't have time for this.
Fair enough.
I'm prepared to be a Philistine, to be an anti-intellectual on that. And similarly with Goethe's Faust, I was disappointed when I got to the second half because it was longer, it had much more scope and much more of the kind of exciting scope of the Faust legend, and it was so bloodless and clinical. So,
Sad. The one other book that I will say, if I can't steal A Little Life answer, because I just didn't read the whole thing and whatever. Just to expand on that, is that All the Light We Cannot See, which won either the Pulitzer or the National... Well, it won the Pulitzer or the National Book Award, one of those, which are prizes that I think I respect. Definitely, I think I aligned myself more in taste than, for example, the Booker. Although the International Booker is always good. But, yeah. Not that there aren't any great Booker nominees. Lincoln in the Bardo won, of course, and it's brilliant. So it's not that, it's more that, yeah, it's more uneven for me than the Pulitzer or the National Book Award. But yeah, I read it because it was supposed to be great, and it's trash. It's like dumpster fire trash. And anyone who thinks it's anything slightly better than, sob story, torture, porn, literature,
oh my god,
it's nothing. Anyways,
it won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, so you're right.
Yeah.
And the Andrew Carnegie Medal for excellence in fiction, not as significant, and was shortlisted for the National Book Award. So
there
actually, it's
both
been
then.
Heaped with praises.
And I think the writing is bad. Like I don't know. It's
like a World War II story, right?
Yeah, and it's bad. It's all the cliches and the fact that it was lauded. Like when a book is lauded more than if we all accept that a book is commercial and it's just that, it's fine. Like
Is that the one with the romance between the blind guy and the woman, or is that
girl?
Thing?
There is. I think you're thinking maybe of The Reader.
Oh, I don't know. No, I don't.
There is a blind woman.
There's this one story.
Oh,
sorry. No, I was just gonna say there's this one story about like a blind person and a sighted person, falling in love, and I think it has a similar name, and I always get the two confused.
Okay, maybe there is blindness involved.
The Light Between Oceans. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, that's not. I don't know.
Yeah, that's not even on his radar.
Okay, but to finish up with positivity.
Yay!
3 books that you are really excited to read. Can't wait to read.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. The Best American Essays 2016.
Nice. Edited by.
Edited by Jonathan Franzen. I've been really wanting to read essays recently. I've been really in the mood for it. And when I finish any of the books I'm currently reading, I'm probably going to get straight to it. And it will just be really nice. There's no particular reason I chose that year. It's just that was the book. I picked it up at a secondhand bookshop. Little shout out to Judd Books.
Oh, yeah. Really great.
And yeah, I wanted to read essays, so hopefully that will be fun. Another one was American Gods, but obviously that's shot now, so we've
Go listen to the Tortoise.
Tortoise Media's expose of Neil Gaiman's
creepiness. Master. Oh god, tragic.
A book I've been wanting to read for a while. I don't know how soon I'm going to get to it, but We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, because that book won or was shortlisted for the Booker, and it's very exciting. Like I don't really know what it's about. Karen Fowler, yeah.
I listened to that.
Is it good?
It's so good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. Yeah. Now I have a great recommend. See, now I have good assurance.
It's really fun. It didn't make my top books, but it's been a while since I listened to it, and it was very fun to listen to, and very insightful. And I still remember lots of it.
Well, there we go. So that's a great sign. Yeah, those are great recommendations. And then the final one, my biography of Derrida. Nice. That's such a thing, but
we all love Derrida.
A new biography of Derrida came out from Verso called An Event Perhaps a few months ago, and I'm really excited to read that. As a little asterisk as well, because technically it's me continuing a novel because I buy into her, but I'm excited to finish the Neapolitan novels. I only have the final one left, The Story of a Lost Child.
Yeah. Well, your asterisk was going to be one of my answers. Anyway,
there we go.
You are getting...
We're all obsessed with the Neapolitan novels over here. That's what the podcast is really about.
That's going to be the first, questions for other guests. Have you read the Neapolitan novels?
Do you know who Elena Ferrante is? You're going to investigate.
Yeah, but what is the second one? The
second one, Story of a New Name.
That's the one.
And I'm very excited for Oliver to read Story of a New Name, because as I've said to you, it's the series is dark pretty much the whole way through, but Story of a New Name takes a nosedive into darkness very quickly, and it's the first one's great, but it's so much better.
The other one was the one that I most recently bought, Fever of Animals, just because it is such a left field book that I'd never seen. And it's from Scribe, which is still a big publisher. But it's mostly out of print, I think, maybe. I'm not sure. But it wasn't available for any big retailers, which is why I got it right away from this indie bookshop. And it's about, this failed painter who is writing a biography of a surrealist painter.
Yeah.
But it's all fictional. And you know me, I love... fictional non-fiction. It's one of my favorite genres. So I'm excited, and obviously I expect lots of discussions about art and literature.
See if it measures up to Pale Fire.
Oh, well, that's a tall order. Little Blue Encyclopedia.
Yes, that's another really good example.
And then the other thing that I'm actually waiting to have sort of a big stretch of uninterrupted time to read, the new Emily Wilson translation of the Iliad.
Oh, you keep talking about this. Yeah, you're desperate to get into this one.
But I haven't had the time. And I do want to, I don't know, if I go to visit a friend over the weekend, and it's a very chill weekend, I might bring that book, and that book alone. Basically, I've never read the Iliad in full. I think I might like it more than the Odyssey. Yeah. I have that feeling.
I won't get into that.
But we won't get into that now. But I have read the Odyssey several times. I haven't read the Emily Wilson translation yet, because I was waiting for the Iliad, but then...
Gotta read them in order.
Exactly. It first came out in this very expensive, beautiful but very expensive hardcover that I didn't want. I wanted the paperback, and finally came out this year, a couple months ago. I bought it, but then I haven't had that time to sit down and read it, but I'm going to make time this year, definitely, and I can't wait.
Yay!
So that was it. That was the first installment in the Chaotic Bibliophile podcast.
It went rather well, I thought.
I thought so too.
Actually didn't make everything go off the rails.
No!
So I'm really pleased.
It was good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that a lot.
And
so please leave comments. What did you think? Yes. And please leave your own answers to any and all of these questions. I'd be very interested. Especially if there's any books that you dislike. That's always really interesting. Or any books that you can't wait to read, especially in this year. We're in the home stretch, so I want to know.
Would you like to come on the podcast? Let us know.
Yeah, that is also a good idea, because we
Bring your dad.
But apart from that, we can maybe arrange some, remote recording. So yeah, that's it.
We did
Please
it, we did
subscribe
it.
if you want to check out my other videos, and that's it. See
Yeah.
you next time.
Bye.
Yeah, you can't help but do the hands, can't you?